Hafan Quarries and the Plymlimon and Hafan Tramway. To the east of Talybont in mid-Wales, a wilderness of coarse grass and reed stretches for miles. The dreary dome of Plymlimon Fawr seems to preside over featureless vistas, where the wind's bluster is punctuated only by the bleating of sheep. But take a closer look. Here and there you might see telltale heaps of grey waste, resisting vegetation, and long overgrown trenches verged by the tottering remains of walls. Scars left by 19th century miners in search of copper and lead. In the 1890s, instead of the serried ranks of spruce trees we see now, mine chimneys and smoke would have risen into the air, the peace shattered by stone crushers and panting steam engines. And above it all, here, on the back of an eminence called Cerrig y Hafan, are the remains of an abandoned stoneworking, originally called the White Stone Quarry. Along with the lead mines nearby, it gave rise to one of the shortest-lived light railways in Wales. But we'll come to that later. The White Stone Quarry, what remains? After a tough walk up to the airy heights of Cerrig y Hafan, we were rewarded by evidence of quarrying activity, although the wonderful views of Plymlimon and Nantamoch were still clamouring for our attention. Here, though, quarried blocks litter the place, and there are piles of scalpings, as if just waiting to be carted away. On the east side of the hill there is a range of buildings, certainly part of which was a smithy. There are a couple of rudimentary shelters too. Small stoneworkings appear all over the hill, and for good measure, there's also a Bronze Age burial cairn at the southern nose of the ridge, called Carn Owen. Back at the working face, big blocks have been barred out, but there's no sign of gunpowder. This was probably all plug and feather work. The stone is interesting, as it bears the impressions of wavelets, looking like a sandy beach when the tide has gone out, which is exactly what it is. A time capsule of 440 million years ago, when this place was under the sea. Some authors have claimed this rock is granite, others limestone. In fact, it's a type of greywacke, a hard, fine-grained rock containing silica and feldspar of lower Silurian age, basically sand turned to rock. To the northwest, extensive fingers of tips reach out, seeming to point to Aberystwyth, showing just how much work must have been done here. The quarry used a 2-foot 3-inch gauge tramway to take its produce down to the Lairy Valley and onwards. Now, we only have 1 year's figures for output, as this was the first year records had to be submitted by law. The quarry was only opened for a couple of years. All the same, between June 1897 and June 1898, slightly more than 1,690 tonnes went down the tramway. That's a fair bit of activity. The stone was used for cobbles, slabs for Birmingham Corporation at the Elan Valley Reservoir, and for the construction of the Aberystwyth Prom. You can see from this map that there were 2 tramways on the hill, an upper one leading to this quarry, and a lower one leading off mysteriously into the woods. On our first visit, the spruce maniacs had planted the trees so tightly we couldn't explore. I reckoned any remains left there would be destroyed, although here the LiDAR does show the tramway clear enough. A couple of years later, I noticed from Google Earth that the trees had been felled. So we came back. We're gluttons for punishment. The forestry felling had left a scene of total chaos, and it looked as if they'd been using the tramway formation to remove the felled timber. But one good thing, they'd only thinned where the North Quarry had been. Perhaps it was too tricky for their giant tree-gobbling machines, The scene was bad, but we could make some assumptions based on what we found. So we bushwhacked through the mayhem of fallen trees. Every yard was a struggle, but we began to notice that underneath the lichen, moss and small plants beneath our feet was a mass of broken rock. Our footsteps rattled. We were standing on an extensive level working area. Sure enough, a little bit farther on, masked by the trees, was a working face. We found several other small pit workings and a couple of formations for long sidings, revetted to be at a suitable height for the pits, which are on the side of a slope. From the old maps, it would seem that there was a run round here and a couple of sheds, possibly even a locomotive shed, as there was a small Bagnall loco that worked the top quarry extension here. There were some ruinous buildings among the trees, very badly degraded. One seemed to have been subject to some heat. Another smithy, perhaps. There was a great deal of red Trentapolia algae on the rocks due to the damp conditions under the trees. It was very difficult to get any sense of the site, other than that the rough layout on the map seemed right. But I'm glad we struggled through the dense vegetation and fallen trees. We hacked and bashed our way out of the workings along the north curve of the tramway, eventually coming out on the open hillside. The tramway was easily followed despite the mess the forestry had made, past more indications of workings and open cuts. But with a sense of relief, we emerged from the forestry. The lower tramway becomes entangled again by the forestry on its way south to the later quarry, but the upper tramway can be followed on foot back to Macalpine's Hafan Quarry. It's a wonderful walk, with more grand views. The tramway is revetted in places and passes a couple of little workings. In a map in Ted Wade's book about the Plymlimon and Hafan, both tramways are shown going to the white stone workings. Ted's map is from original plans of the quarry, which aren't available to us now. I'm confused because on the OS maps only the lower one is marked. That the upper tramway exists is not in doubt, but I can't make out what happened and when. I wonder if the little Bagnall only negotiated the lower tramway, and the upper tramway was simply horse-worked, as there are no points, and it would certainly be problematic getting the Bagnall up and down the incline. Macalpine's quarry, Carn Owen. This quarry was opened up on the southern end of Carrega Hafan in the late 1950s. The stone was needed for the Nantamoch Dam, a couple of miles to the southeast. Macalpines made haul roads and excavations that have obliterated much of the tramway here, and present-day off-road motorcyclists have added to the confusion. However, enough remains for the tramway route and the mine workings to be traced. Here is the tramway with the modern road above it. The first thing of interest is a crown hole below the tramway as it curves into the quarry on a ledge. This is a shaft from the Bwlch mine, half a mile northeast into the forestry. Most of the mines in this area were all managed by the same folk during the time of the tramway. This was the late 1890s. One was Thomas Molyneux, a Lancashire businessman. He provided the money, while Captain John Davis, a mining expert of Talybont, provided the expertise. We're very close to the Hafan mine here, another one of Molyneux and Davis's mines. Some stories tell that the two mines join underground. It's a tempting idea, but I've also read that communication between the two mines was by carrier pigeon, so go figure. The tramway from the White Stone Quarry carried on now, above the south end of the hill. The upper tramway carries on its ledge, and below we see the remains of another shaft in the modern quarry floor. This is Captain Davis's shaft, sunk in 1853 to meet a rise from a crosscut. The adits for these workings have been lost due to 20th century quarrying. Here above the modern quarry workings, the upper tramway descends on a single-track incline to the quarry floor. Also the upper working floor, I assume, of the Hafan mine. This incline is still very well preserved. Surprisingly, there are also signs of some much older sledgeways on the hillside, intersecting the incline here. Were these from the white stone workings? Once at quarry floor level, we can wonder at the beautifully exposed strata in the quarry. This is a freeze-frame scene of movement, millions of years ago, between contorted, folded beds of sandstones. The Hafan incline. Once on the quarry floor, there are several remains of crown shafts and diggings from earlier times. So much modern activity has gone on here that it's hard to make things out. But soon we arrived at the crimp for the still impressive Hafan incline. We gazed down in awe, marvelling at how it has survived. Sadly, the drum house has gone, but we know that it was a double-tracked, self-acting incline where the weight of wagons descending hauled wagons coming up by gravity. We negotiated the precipitous incline very cautiously, because in places it is at a gradient of 1 in 2.6. On our left, we could see the yawning stopes of the Hafan mine, where ore bodies were worked out from underground to surface. This didn't happen overnight. The Hafan lead mine was first started by Sir Hugh Middleton in 1650 and worked at least until Molyneux's time. There are extensive mineral dumps, collapsed shafts, levels and cobbing areas to the left. They make a fascinating study for the mine enthusiast. Towards the bottom of the incline, there's a very fine water wheel pit. This is known as Barbari's Wheel Pit, after the manager in the 1850s. The wheel links to a leat also dug under the direction of Michael Barbary. This can be followed in the ground to the east of the wheel. It linked up with other leats on the slopes of Moel Cyneinog, now obliterated by the spruce fiends. Barbary's wheel pit is very fine, with a lovely arched tail race. This echoes two almost submerged adit mouths to the west, likely drainage adits from the old workings. The smart dry stone arches have degraded in the last 10 years since we've been visiting. Things are also confused here by the spoil from the Hafan deep adit, which has engulfed a lot of these lower workings, aided by spate water drain-off. The deep adit itself has been lost to landslips. However, the spoil is rich with weathered, sparry iron carbonate, a sure sign of copper and lead mineralization. As the tips reached out into the Hafan Cyneinog, we spotted a powder store, little more than a pile of rubble now. Perhaps one of the most surprising things about the Hafan incline is that it took less than a year to build. Were there vast numbers of navvies involved? I can't see it somehow. But however you look at it, the incline is a formidable achievement. Now we reach the bottom of the incline and the start of the Plymlimon and Hafan Tramway. It was basically a run-round loop here, with a couple of sidings laid in the Nantamaisa Mawr. Much of the station site has washed away now, not that it had any buildings or platforms. It's no surprise that passenger trains didn't come any farther than this. But perhaps there was a path to the top for intrepid tourists. Who knows? Here's the layout as far as we know it. The formation continues now in a westerly direction, descending gradually. We saw several abutments for overbridges crossing small streams. The formation makes a very picturesque walk as it carries on into the Cynaenog Valley, with views over to the occasional remote farmhouse. But all too soon, the way is halted by the forestry folk, aided and abetted by the farmer. This is a public right-of-way, but the farmer has erected a comprehensive barrier to progress here, in the form of a very high fence. Luckily, we managed to climb through the trees to the right and rejoin the tramway. At least the forestry have respected the route here, and as the trees grow higher, it will hopefully become more accessible. Once out of the woods, we encountered a fascinating sight, the Bwlch Glas mine. This was another of Molyneux's interests at the time, although ironically, it wasn't properly in operation during the short life of the Plynlimon and Hafan. It would have made a difference, I'm sure, as it was a successful enterprise. I propose to make a separate video about the mine here soon. Bwlch Glas was at its peak in the 1920s, and some of the spoil has been dumped over the formation, although it can be picked up a little bit further along to the west. By now, the trackbed is difficult to follow due to vegetation growth and the fences of private landowners. But you can still encounter it in peaceful moments, as the line keeps its own quiet counsel. Bridge abutments and embankments reveal themselves like secrets amid tree shadows. So the formation runs downhill at an average gradient of 1 in 30 to Talybont. There's nothing of the line left in Talybont, although at the moment the station site is clear of development. There might have been a platform here, and a loco shed and water tank. There are marks still in the field from foundations. It's not very close to the village, but handy enough, I suppose, for the two pubs, the White Lion and the Black Lion, where the wages were handed out for the miners, and many, it is said, left having spent a good deal of their wages on beer. In Talybont there was the Achta Crib mine, which was a big concern, but I don't know if it benefited the P&H, although it should have done. At the moment our Sitka-loving friends are trying their best to obliterate the remains here, but in any case, I think the mine was out of production by 1891. After Talybont, the route becomes uninteresting for tramway enthusiasts due to agricultural improvements, road developments, and new housing on the way to Llandra, where stone was transshipped to the Cambrian railways. The Plymlimon and Hafan Tramway, the history. As we now know, in 1892, a 2-foot 3-inch gauge tramway was proposed by local mining expert Captain John Davis of Talybont and by Thomas Molyneux of Warrington. He was a mining entrepreneur. They needed to have an outlet to the Siat and Aslas for their mining interests. It's hard to tell now, but there were many mining operations at the head of the Nantamais Mawr, as this map shows. The route, 7 miles 26 chains, with a half-mile extension to the Stone Quarry, was completed in 1897. Sadly, right from the start, it was a triumph of optimism over practicality. The tramway couldn't reach the sea because the Cambrian railway stood firmly in the way and forbade the Plynlimon and Hafan to cross their line anywhere.
Nope.
So the tramway had to end at Llanfihangel, now known as Llandra, where stone and lead ore was transshipped to Cambrian railway wagons at a cost. 2 locomotives worked the line, but didn't venture up to the quarry extension. One was Victoria, a strange and uncertain thing, built by John Slee and Company. Now Molyneux had an interest in Slee and Company, who obviously had very little experience of building a railway locomotive, since they appeared to base their design on a fever dream owing something to De Winton of Carnarvon. It didn't do much useful work, being underpowered. To add to Victoria's troubles, she ran over a workman sadly killing him and severely injuring 2 others during a mishap involving a sleeper laid across the track. After that, Victoria was to lie unused, off her wheels, ironically on a pile of sleepers for the duration. Slee & Co., well, they went out of business in 1914. The next locomotive was a second-hand Bagnall, which was renamed Talybont. Being a well-tried design, she was a success and worked all the traffic after Victoria had expired. Afterwards, she was sold to the contractors of the Vale of Rheidol Railway, where she became their number 3. She was scrapped in 1924. Some original Plynlimon and Hafan wagons also survive at the Vale of Rheidol. One further locomotive was acquired to work the extension to the Stone Quarry. As we've seen, this was a little Bagnall named Hafan. It was light and nimble for working the sketchy extension. Despite the tramway and fairly extensive workings, the Hafan or White Stone Quarry ceased working in 1899, like the railway that had been built to serve it. It had only been open for 3 years. Some sources say that the sets from the quarry were not grippy enough, that horses slipped on them. Other accounts say that the rock was found to have cleavage that split under pressure, making it unsuitable for buildings. Yet, there are farm buildings made of Hafan stone in the Lairy Valley that have stood up very well to the vagaries of the mid-Wales weather. And of course, Macalpines were also quite happy to use the same stone in the 60s to build the Nantamoch Dam. There are other accounts of underhand dealings against the tramway, but whatever the truth of the matter, what finished the tramway off was the steadily increasing cost of transshipping stone at Llanfihangel and a few long-standing disagreements with local landowners. If the railway had, somehow, survived into the 1960s and the Macalpine era, perhaps some of the tramway would have made a wonderfully scenic tourist line, run by a preservation society. Sadly, we'll never know. If you've enjoyed this video, you might like to take a look at some further information about these quarries and many others on my Treasure Maps website. There's a link in the description below. Thanks for watching, and please like and subscribe if you haven't already.